Okay, today we are going to talk about the exo-solar origin of water, which means from outside the solar system, as the concept being presented in the opening texts of the 17th chapter of the 5th book of the Bhagavatam. So we concluded chapter 16, and I published the book on that, and that's available on Amazon right now, and the link is in the description below. So after describing all that astronomy in chapter 16, the subject continues in chapter 17. It's going to continue, I think, at least through chapter 23, maybe 24, something like that. So this is a very big chunk of astronomy. Well, let's get to it. So last week we got our feet into this little pool. We started looking at this last week. This week I'm going to clean up and review what we looked at last week, and then move 3 more texts forward, because those 3 texts present a whole picture of what's going on. It's like one solid section is the first 4 texts. So let us do that. Whoa. 1 second. Okay, let's do that now. Turn it on. This one? Yes. Sri Shuka Uvacha. The beautiful Shuka said, Tatra Bhagavata Shakshat Yankya Lingasya Vishnu Vikramata. So now I'm just reading you directly the translation without explaining it. Shuka said, Vishnu himself strode from that place, the sun, via the impact of its activity. Vamapadangushta nakhanibhinna Udtvanda khataha vivarena anta pravishtaya bahya jaladhara. The nail on the big toe of his left foot breached the boundary of the upper cosmic hemisphere. Something came in through that breach, carrying external water. Tacharana pankaja of avanejana aruna kinjalka uparanjita. Spilling over the pollen like dust on his lotus-like foot, it was tinted reddish. Akila jagad agga malapaha upasparsha amala. It is pure, so respectfully touching it removes pollution and illness from the entire world. Sakshat Bhagavata Paditi Anupalakshita Vacha Abhitiyamana. In the absence of any other qualifying terms, it was directly named Bhagavata Padi. I decided to put, oh my God, look, there's no A in there. Bhagavat Padi, which basically means at Bhagavata's foot. Ati Mahata Kalina Yuga Sahasra Upalakshanena Divo Murdhanyavattarayat Tat Vishnupadam Ahu. For a very long time, about 1,000 yuga, it descended from the sky summit to Vishnu's other foot. Okay, now let us figure out what was just said. So just the English here of the translation. Beautiful Shuka said, Vishnu himself strode from that place, the sun, via the impact of its activity. The nail on the big toe of his left foot breached the boundary of the upper cosmic hemisphere. Something came in through that breach, carrying external water. Spilling over the pollen-like dust on his lotus-like foot, it was tinted reddish. It is pure, so respectfully touching it removes pollution and illness from the entire world. In the absence of any other qualifying terms, it was directly named Bhagavat Padi. For a very long time, about 1,000 yuga, it descended from the sky summit to Vishnu's other foot. Okay, now the explanation. The last topic in the previous chapter was Bhagavata, the sun. That was where the astronomy wound up. describing the size of the sun, the distance of Earth's orbit around the sun, the apparent motion of the sun due to Earth's orbit around the sun, stuff like that was the last topic in 16. So now it says Tatra, which means from there, Bhagavata, from that sun. The way the surface of the sun functions, that's what this means. Tatra Bhagavata Yagya Lingasya. The way the surface of the sun functions, the way it works, the things that it does, generated a very powerful effect on the motions of space. Vishnu Vikramata, which disrupted the upper boundary of the solar system, allowing an exosolar object to enter Vivarenanta Pravishta, carrying exosolar water. Yabhaya Jaladhara. Coming from a great distance, this object took an extremely long time to fall towards the sun. Ahimata Kalina Yugasastra Lakshana. Before eventually coming very close, before eventually coming close enough to impact the earth. Divo Murdhanyavatataria Tadvishnu Padam. So, just without all the Sanskrit, the English there is, the way the surface of the sun functions generated a very powerful effect on the motions of space, which disrupted the upper boundary of the solar system, allowing an exosolar object to enter, carrying exosolar water. Coming from a great distance, this object took an extremely long time to fall towards the sun, before eventually coming close enough to impact the earth. This is actually what the text is saying. This upper boundary of the solar system maybe it's what we know as the heliopause, maybe it's the Oort cloud, it's something like that, something that defines the outer boundary of the sun's universe, the sun's realm. An unusual event on the sun could disrupt these, since they are caused by the sun. The sun causes the heliopause because it generates solar winds that push out to a certain distance and then suddenly pause at this boundary called the heliopause. So because the sun is generating that force, if there's a disruption to the sun or a change from the sun or an action from the sun, then that boundary could be disturbed. And if that boundary is disturbed, this disruption could dislodge a water-bearing object, like a comet, from its orbit, from its super distant orbit, like an Oort cloud orbit, capturing it in the sun's gravitational influence. In the next few texts, Shuka will give more details about its descent towards the sun. So heliopause is the boundary created by the solar winds, and Oort cloud is the utmost extent of the gravitational influence of the sun. Beyond this, nothing is collected by the sun. So now I just wanted to discuss the relation of this concept to modern theories. The concept presented in this text, just make sure everything is cool. And I'm not talking to the wall. I'm good. It doesn't look so great. Hopefully the resolution is better for you than it is for me. All right. Continuing. The relation to modern theories. The concept presented in this text is nearly identical to the heated contemporary scientific discussions on the exoplanetary origins of Earth's water. So the idea is, when the Earth forms, where does the water come from? Because it's not hospitable to water in its initial state. Right? So there's many discussions in the current scientific arena about how water wound up here. The current theories that seem closest to what Shuka is describing involve water being brought to Earth via comets from Kuiper belt or Oort cloud. So this what Shuka is talking about in this text is the very same idea that many people in the scientific community are, doing mathematical proofs of or investigations of. An important thing to bear in mind is that Shuka is describing a one-time event, while the above-mentioned theories tend to rely on more regular events in the early history of the solar system. So that's one thing to bear in mind. What Shuka is talking about here is something that happened once and only once. It doesn't regularly happen. Once and only once in the history of the solar system. So most of the theories in the current thing are looking for things that could regularly happen. Of course, once and only once in the history of the solar system does mean regularly, because the solar system is cyclically created and destroyed. But the period of the regularity is extremely long. I think it's extremely long. So, now let's talk about Vishnu's stride. Shuka references the powerful motion generated by the sun in allegory with Vishnu's stride. This is a reference to Vishnu's avatar as Trivikrama, who strode first with his right foot from the lower cosmos to the middle, where the sun is located, and from there with his left to the upper. That's why you hear mention of the left foot. And then why is it the big toenail? It means you just barely influenced the edge. It just barely crossed the boundary. You didn't pop it, you don't crack it, break it. You just put a little pressure on it. So it's not that there's this supernova or something. It's just some kind of significant disturbance from the sun. Injured or bruised his solar boundary in such a way, with such a timing, that it could pull some object in from the outside. This allegory relies on a few double meanings. The first is the word Vishnu. Vishnu means all-pervasive, but also means locomotion. Location. All-pervasive, Vishnu, means location, because you're pervading. And motion, you're pervading everywhere. Right. So Vishnu, the word, is a word that implies locomotion and movement, and indeed Vishnu's simplest function as a Vedic deity is to oversee the locomotive functions of living things. That's his Vedic simple function. The text hasn't scrolled down. Yeah, look at that. Okay, one sec. Oh my goodness. One sec, let me try to fix this up. Why not? It is now scrolled down. Sorry about that. Thank you, Stephanie. So that's Vishnu. Krama. So he says Vikrama in the text. Krama or step also means action or influence. Yagya means sacrifice, and it's a name of Vishnu, and Yagya itself means to endeavor or exert. And linga which means a defined form, an outline, etc., a definable thing, also means a symbol or an allegory. So on the basis of how Shuka is poetically using these four words, he gets this double meaning of Vishnu striding from here to there in the cosmos, which simultaneously means the exertion of power from the sun creates a change in the way that space moves, in the physics of space, which affects the boundary. Okay? Another thing that's in this text is the qualities of water. Shuka glorifies the water that entered the solar system. He says it was extremely clean and pure, amala, able to clean anything that comes into contact with it correctly, malapaha upasparshana, and able to cure illness, relieve distress, etc., agapa. These qualities seem very familiar. We all rely on water every day to clean ourselves and our belongings and to stay hydrated, healthy, and relaxed. Yeah, and we wash our clothes, we wash our face. We drink water, and then it gets rid of our headaches, and we stay healthy, and we relax. We cool down with water. So the way that he's glorifying the water doesn't make it sound like it's something very unusual. That, you know, it doesn't make it sound like it's some very unique thing. It's water. Shuka suggests that water is pure because of its contact with Vishnu's foot. Tatcharana pankaja avanejana. This seems mytho-sentimental. If we forget that Vishnu's stride from the sun references the power of solar energy. It's the allegory to the power of solar energy, the physics of solar energy. The purity of water is indeed restored only due to that power, which evaporates and thus distills it. Water becomes, gross as it sits still and collects impurity, but because it's recycled by the power of the sun, it regains its clarity and cleanliness and healthful properties because it's distilled by the evaporation process. So this is the idea of the effect of the sun on water, making it super pure. Shuka says that the object and the water it carried couldn't be named very descriptively because it had not yet revealed its qualities. Anupalakshita vacha abdhiyamana. Anupalakshana means it hadn't shown its qualities. Laksha. It hadn't shown its lakshan. So it means that this stuff that came into the solar system was water, but it's not like water flowing out of your tap or water flowing in a river, because after all, how would water flow in space? It would evaporate. So the water that has come into the solar system has not yet shown its qualities. This could mean that the water was not yet conventional water. In other words, it may have been frozen or embedded in crystal. So there's this concept that I recently learned while working on chapter 16, that water has two solid states. One is ice, but the other is as a result of being stuck in between, as far as I understand it, as a result of being stuck in between the lattices of crystals. And in that form, being stuck in between the lattices of crystals is carried in stone. So in either way, as ice or in its crystal, you don't recognize the thing as water because it doesn't have the properties of water, namely liquidity. So this is what's meant by anupalakshita. It hadn't shown its main qualities. So that means it was a big ball of ice. The object could only be literally referred to. Because it hadn't shown its qualities, it could only be literally referred to. You couldn't descriptively or creatively name it as Bhagavat-padi. This name has two implications. The first one is that this thing originated from Bhagavat-pada. And the second thing is that it orients to Bhagavat-pada. The term Bhagavat-pada, or the term Bhagavat, right? Or Bhagavat-pada. The term Bhagavat-pada also has two implications: Vishnu's foot and the location of the sun. So this was what we described this at the end of chapter 16, what the word Bhagavat means. And hydro is the term for this crystal water lattice. Okay, so Bhagavat-padi is the way that it could be named at this time. That means that it is associated with Bhagavat's foot. So that means that it's coming from Bhagavat, and also that it's going towards Bhagavat. And the word Bhagavat has two implications. Last chapter we showed it actually has three, at least three, but one's the sun and one is Vishnu. Another one could be Brahma. So the way that he's naming this object means that it's coming from and going to Bhagavat, which is a very great way to name it, especially since the opening statement of his book, Bhagavatam, was Janmadhyasya Yaton Vayaditaratas, which means everything comes from and goes to Bhagavat. So let's explain this a little bit. This thing that's probably a comet is going from where to where? Bhagavat Padi, I need to get rid of this last A. Bhagavat Padi comes from Bhagavan's left foot. It comes from, in that sense, Bhagavat Padi, and is pulled by the gravity of Bhagavat, the sun, to Bhagavan's right foot. So, this is part of the reason why he's using the Trivikram, using the details of the Trivikram pastime, story, incident. The right foot is located in the middle of the universe on the sun, and the left foot is located at the top of the universe. The universe is whatever Shuka's idea of a universe is, which is a solar system sphere. So the comet is moving from the left foot to the right foot, which means from the top of this solar system boundary, northernmost part of the solar system boundary, to the sun itself. Bhagavat's right foot is in the exact middle of that sphere on the sun, thus the object moved from the northern apex of the solar boundary towards the center of that sphere where the sun itself is. A line drawn between the 2 points. If you draw a line between the northern apex and the sun, you will get pretty close to the rotational y-axis of Meru. It should point to the celestial north, more or less, approximatively. The apex of which is called Vishnupada, and also Druva. So the point, that's the apex, is called Vishnupada. So that's another reason why that's another part of this poem, and this very strong allegory. The place where Vishnu put his foot is called Vishnupada. It's the place that doesn't move, that stays stable. All the stars rotate around it. One more thing about this text, or two more things. One more thing is that it identifies a third summit for Meru. The text describes a new summit of Meru, which brings the total to 3. So this is another sense of Trishringa, of having 3 axes or 3 peaks. The first summit of Meru is Bu's surface, which is the summit relative to the core. The second summit of Meru is the sun. Summit means what Meru extends to. So the first thing Meru, the core of the earth, extends to is the surface of the earth. The second thing the core of the earth extends to is the sun, because it swings around the sun. And then the third now summit is the extreme northern boundary of local space relative to the sun. So the Meru makes a peak to the surface makes a peak to the sun makes a peak to Vishnupad, the northernmost point. And those are the 3 peaks. Now, an empirical fact check, or just an empirical correlation to see if this would make sense, the stuff that we just described. At first, it seems that we could use the information in this text to calculate the distance to the extreme northern solar boundary and thereby discover the size of Shuka's universe. That's what we spent a lot of time on last week in the live stream. And without any conclusive result, right? Cosmic objects, and these are other things that I didn't even consider at that time. Cosmic objects, however, move in circular paths, not straight lines. Thank you, Shanti. So we would have to deduce the radius from a circumference, but that's not too hard. But additionally, Bhagavat Padi is an object dislodged by a disruptive event, and therefore must orbit on a highly irregular ellipse. So finding the radius of an ellipse is way more complicated than finding it of a perfect circle. Complicating things even more, the term fall, Avatatara, indicates the Bhagavat Padi had a decaying orbit, not even an ellipse. So it's a gradually shrinking spiral. So that's very complicated. So like Vishnu's left toenail, these calculations cross the boundary of my intellect. I will proceed with a humbler calculation to check whether the values in this text are reasonable in comparison to empiric observation of actual comets. So there's actually even one more thing. Yeah. It's not entirely clear whether the object is orbiting the sun in a decaying spiral or falling in an arc directly. It seems to be that it's orbiting in a decaying spiral because of the word yuga. And I will explain that at some point in this live stream. I think I can explain that right now. But so what I'm going to do, instead of trying to calculate how far does Shuka think the solar boundary is, it seems like we might have been able to calculate that from this text, but in fact we can't, or if we can, I can't. But what you can do is check to see if what he's talking about here in this text makes sense with what people that actually use telescopes, etc., see when they use those telescopes. Shuka says Bhagavad Pati took a very long time, Adi Mahatakala, about 1,000 yugas, Yuga Sahasra, to fall from Vishnu's foot to the upper atmosphere. When used without a qualifier, like Kali Yuga or Dwarpa Yuga, when it's just Yuga, that refers to the complete Yuga, sometimes called the Mahayuga or Chatur Yuga, which is a duration of 4.32 million years. It seems redundant of Shuka to say it took a very long time and also say about 1,000 yugas. But in astronomy, yuga also indicates conjunction. Conjunction of things is called yug, or yut. So he's using the term yuga not redundantly only in its time sense, because he already said it took a long time. Then he says it took 1,000 yugas, but what he's saying with yugas is there's 1,000 conjunctions. And the use of the conjunction is in the sense of this defines an orbit or a place in the orbit. So yugas are used in astronomy to provide reference markers for circular orbits. Shuka seems to be saying that Bhagavad Pati completed 1,000 orbits over the span of 1,000 yuga. Over the long span, right? Giving it an orbital period of 4.32 million years. Okay. So what you can deduce accurately and confidently from what he said is that the orbital period of Bhagavad Pati is 4.32 million years. How confident? Not sure. We have to wait for the real full mathematical proofs to get full confidence, but pretty confident. Does this make any sense? A comet with a 4.32 million year orbital period. Well, there's a comet that's very similar to what Shuka is talking about. It's called Bernardinelli Bernstein. Comet Bernardinelli Bernstein seems quite similar to Shuka's comet in two important ways. One, it is thought to be from the extreme boundary of the solar system, the Oort cloud. And two, it orbits perpendicular to the ecliptic, which is important because that's what Shuka said is happening. It orbits at a 95-degree inclination. Its orbital period is indeed about 2.8 million years on the inbound and 4.56 million on the outbound. So it puts Shuka's comet certainly into the ballpark of the comets that we can see. This supports the idea that the object Shuka is talking about is an ice-rich comet from the utmost edges of the sun's gravitational influence. Okay? That is a review and a clarification of that one text that we covered last week. Now, let's go forward and look at some new texts. The next three texts are going to talk about what you can kind of see behind me. How did this comet move through the sky? He's going to give 3, or maybe you can say 3.5 or 4 points along the journey and discuss what happened at those points. So here's the first thing he says. Yatra vav viravrata Autanapadi Parama Bhagavata Asmat Kula Devata Charanara Vindoktamiti Yam Anusavanam Utkrishnamana Bhagavad Bhakti Yogena Dridham Klidyamananta Hridaya Aulkantya Vivasa Amilita Lochana Yugala Kudmala Vigalitamala Bhashpakalaya Abhivajyamana Roma Pulaka Kulaka Adhunapi Pramadarena Shirasha Bibhati. Thinking, this water is from the lotus-like feet of our family Devata. So water from feet is something that's kind of foreign to our poetic and metaphorical dictionaries. But in the old days, people would walk around instead of driving cars. And they would also not even always wear shoes, or they would wear sandals. So when you go from one place to another, your feet get dirty. So people in the old days had feet that were dirty. And so one of the first things that you do to a guest, like the first thing that's in front of your house, is a place to wash your feet before you come in my house and make the whole place dirty. And also, if you're a respected guest, then the host would themselves wash your feet to welcome you into the house. And so the water of the feet of a respected guest is a way of showing that you took great honor to the guest. And you would put the water on your head, sprinkle of it, to show, your respect and regard for the guest. So this is why a metaphor of water coming from Vishnu's feet is very meaningful to people with the Vedic context. So it says here that Druva, the son of Uttanapada, was thinking, this water that's come in here from this cosmic breach, it's coming from Vishnu's foot. So I should put it on my head. Thinking this water is from the lotus-like feet of our family Devata, Aparamam Bhagavata. Bhagavata means a person who's dedicated to Bhagavan. Geminaris, thank you. Yes, Jessica. Right? So, thinking this, the Parama Bhagavata, strong-vowed son of Uttanapad, stays at that very spot. You remember hearing about this person because his story was told in the 4th canto, and we went over that. At this very moment, he bears that water. This is an important phrase, by the way, at this very moment. At this very moment, he bears that water on his head with paramount adoration, making his firm devotional bond to Bhagavan stronger by the day, liquefying his inner heart from extremely intense dedication, and making goosebumps bristle across his body as tears escape from his tightly shut eyes like water dripping from closed lotuses. So this is beautiful. I mean, Shuka is the best poet. The person who can turn prose into poetry is the best poet. The poetry itself is a crutch to the artist. The person who can bring poetry into prose is the most exalted poet. And Shuka is doing exactly that. So his description of Druva is lotus-like eyes. Lotuses have a very elongated petal, which is reddish at the end. So when the lotus bud closes, since the lotus lives in water, some water might be captured inside and then it would drizzle out. And that's what he's saying about Druva's eyes. So you can imagine him bearing this extreme force onto his head. That's the Dhridavrata of Druva. And he was powerful enough. Remember his story, how powerful he was to bear that force. Now here's the notes. At that very spot, the verse opens with Yatra Havava, which means at that very spot. So at that very spot, at this point, means the spot where the left big toenail punctured the boundary, the solar boundary. At that very spot refers to the location of Vishnu's left foot, at the northern apex of the sphere of space. Srimad Bhagavatam 4.9.25 confirms that Uttanapad's son Druva resides at this location, which is further north than the Saptarishi, which is the Big Dipper. Druva, which is the name of Uttanapad's son, means unmoving. The projection of Meru's y-axis, the rotational axis of the Earth, earns this name Druva because it does not move while all of the stars rotate around it. So that's that. At that very point means the North Celestial Pole, which is an observational artifact from the Earth, which is important for understanding what he's talking about. At this very moment, Adhunapi clarifies that Druva had gone to that spot after the event and remains there to this day, because this is a fantastically ancient event. He's describing the creation of the solar system. So Druva could not have been there when it happened. But after the event, he respects that spot and remains there to this day. I might want to look into this a little bit further. The location and the person dwelling there both bear the name Druva. Bhagavat Padi begins its entry into our system from Druva. This is probably an observational projection of apparent intersection from the viewpoint of Bu, because that's what Druva is. It's the North Celestial Pole. It probably means that Bhagavat Padi's orbit began at this celestial altitude, or that may be the place where it became visible in the sky. That celestial altitude of Druva is 90 degrees north. And it descended at roughly 90 degree equatorial inclination, making it appear to be falling straight down, Avatatara. Okay? That's what's going on in this text. It's talking about the origin, and I think on the screen, if I move... Hey, you know, let me just do this. You see Druva. So you can see the line is... This is the movement of Bhagavat Padi from Druva southward, downward. This is a stereoscopic projection, or whatever they call it, of space looking up as best as I could get it from my planetarium software. I would rather have had it pointing down, but for some reason. Jonathan asked, this water is supposed to be Ganga water, and doesn't Ganga water flow over Shiva? So this is also, no mention has been made of Ganga. Yeah, and people interpolate that this is Ganga's water, but no mention has been made. Also, the word Ganga just means water. Gam gam. Ganga iti. Which means the stuff that flows. So even if we say it's Ganga water is oxymoronic. Ganga means water. And doesn't Shiva do this? Why is Druva mentioned? Doesn't Shiva hold Ganga correct? So this, don't worry, this water is going to fall in a lot of places and a lot of things, and different people are going to hold it on their head. Okay, so I can reappear. Wow. That was a classy reappearance. Let's look at the next text now. This was text 3. The descent to the 7 stars. So we just mentioned that Dhruva's location is conspicuous by being north of Saptarishi. Now, Bhagavat Padi is going to fall from Polaris, or Druva, to Saptarishi, or the Big Dipper. Tata Saptarishyas Tat Prabhavabhigya. This should be one word. Tat Saptarishyas Tata Saptarishyas Tat Prabhavabhigya Yam Nanutapasya Atyantiki Siddhir Etavati Bhagavati Sarvatmani Vasudeve Anuparata Bhakti Yoga Labhena Eva Upekshitanyarthatmagataya Muktimiva Agata Mumukshava Iva Sabhahumanam Adhyapi Jarta Jutair Udvahanti. Next. Now the word is next. Tata. Not yata, but tata. So next, after emanating from Polaris, the 7 sages deliberated and understood its powers. And then they concluded, the final sum of all our endeavors is this opportunity. What opportunity? The opportunity to put this on our head. Gaining an unfluctuating bond of devotion to the all-identified, all-attractive, brilliantly conscious basis of reality, Vasudeva, and Vishnu, and thus losing all interest in other objects and personal goals, even liberation, they came forward with great eagerness and respect. Even at this very moment, they carry that water in their matted locks of hair. Here are the notes. The 7 sages, Saptarishi, are the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. So you can see them here, the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. You can see them behind me, right? So yes. Kratu, which is Dubhe, is the most northern of them. At 61 degrees latitude. Mrichialkite is the most southern at 54 degrees. Thus they are relatively horizontal. If you're not used to reading these kind of circular things, you might not pick up on that, but they're all at the same distance circularly from Druva, basically. After some time, the Bhagavapadi's orbit progressed or decayed about 30 degrees, from 90 degree Polaris to 60 degrees Saptarishi, to place it in conjunction or yuga with these stars. The horizontality of this constellation discourages imagining a sequential descent through the 7 in some natural order. So you might, when I started to try to envision this, I started to think, is it dripping? Like bouncing from one star to the next, coming down. But the constellation isn't pointing down. That's why it's called the Big Dipper. Actually, it's like collecting. Yeah, the origin of the Big Dipper. It's collecting the water. It's a pot collecting the water. So since it's horizontal, that discourages that concept, but also all 7 sages bear the water in their matted hair at the same time, at this very moment, Adhyapi. This implies that Bhagavatpadi had fractured into 7 objects by the time it was at 60 degrees altitude in the sky. This is consistent with what we empirically know of the behavior of comets. So what Shuka has actually told us is this one object became 7 objects by the time it was at 60 degrees altitude. And that's what I'm illustrating behind me here. This is not an exact trajectory or anything. I'm just trying to illustrate the point. And here it is. Ba-boom. Okay. Now, one more text for today. Descent through the zodiac, from the Saptarishi, through the zodiac to the earth. Tata anek sahasra koti. Tata anek sahasra koti vimana. Anek sankula deva yanena avataranti. Indu mandalam avarya brahma sadane nipatati. Short text. Next, as innumerable thousands of millions of flying objects, it descended through the arrayed collections of divine planetary orbits. Once below the orbit of the moon, it liquefied and fell upon the place where the sun always shines. This is amazing stuff. Notes, Bhagavatpadi entered our solar system from about 90 degrees altitude, Druva. Descending to about 60 degrees altitude, Saptarishi, it fragmented into 7. Now, at about 30 degrees altitude, the ecliptic zodiac region, which is described as where the planets, Devayana, are collectively arrayed, Anik Sankula. The 7 fragments become innumerable. At this zone, the 30-degree zone, these 7 fragments have turned into innumerable thousands of objects hurtling through the sky. Vimana means a thing which moves in the sky. It doesn't. It tends to imply something that people ride on, like a spaceship or an airplane. And that's Shuka being beautiful, being poetic, and showing the beauty of the thing. Anek Sahasra Koti Vimana. By the time it had crossed this zone. So this one comet fractures into 7, and the 7 fracture into more, and those fracture into more. And by the time it's at 30 degrees, there's thousands of them. Then the remainder of the statement can be understood in 2 different ways. The first way is the influence of the moon, Indu Mandala, captured Avarya, the fragments, diverting them from falling into the sun. Brahma sadhane nipatati. Avarya Brahma sadhane nipatati. I should include that word here. Avarya. So this is one way that this verse could be saying that the influence of the moon's orbit, Hindu mandala, captured the fragments which diverted them from falling into the sun, because the sun is pulling them closer. But as it comes below the zodiac zone, that's why I said maybe there's 3 plus something. There's also like this 4th area, which is Earth. Below the zodiac zone, it comes to the Earth. And then that zone, instead of hitting the sun, it came to Earth. So it might be saying that, or it might be saying the fragments liquefied Avarya when they descended past the southern limit of the zodiac belt, Indu Mandala, and then fell Nipatati upon the horizon, the 0-degree altitude, or the equator, 0-degree latitude, the place where the sun always shines, Brahma Sadhane. Indu Mandala means the moon's circle. So the moon has the extreme declinations of the solar system. So it defines the upper and lower boundaries of the zodiac, more or less. And so that's the signification of saying when it crossed Indu Mandala. So from Polaris, it's a single comet. From Saptarishis, it's broken into 7 and then starts breaking up. And then as from the zodiac region, it's breaking into innumerable fragments. And then from below the zodiac, it's vaporizing or turning into water. And then falling upon the 0 altitude, which is the surface of the earth, with what the sun shines upon. In my opinion, the second meaning is Sukha's intended meaning, because it will be more consistent with the texts that are yet to come, which make it clear that the water did in fact reach Brahma Sadhana. So the first meaning is saying that the moon diverted it from falling into the sun, taking Brahma Sadhana as the sun. But the second meaning is that the comet liquefied below the location of the moon and fell upon Brahma Sadhana, the surface of the earth, what the sun shines upon. Since the next texts are going to say it indeed flows from Brahma Sadhana to the various spots on the globe, then the second meaning is really the only acceptable one. So here's what it looks like. Something like this. And this is how the ice from outside the solar system brought water. All the water, some of the water, some special water. That's coming soon, to be decided. Let's see what the next texts say. Currently, we don't know. The immediately next text that we'll cover next week give one reason to believe that he means all the water. But certainly, I'm not done researching all this stuff, so it's not a firm conclusion. There's one more interesting point about these three celestial regions. You can see the three celestial regions here. There's the 90-degree area, there's the 60-degree border, there's a 30-degree border. So there's the border between 0 and 30, 30 and 60, 30 and 60, 90. If you were alive and with us while we were covering chapter 16, and which, if not just by the book, which is published, then you'll recall this 0 degrees, 30 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees as being the way that Bu's surface was defined in terms of latitudes, right? And that there was these borders, which were Ilavrita, Nila, Shveta, and Shringa, that project upwards. Utseda, Ayut Yojana Utseda, unlimitedly upwards. And so here's the upwards projection of them into space. Just as Bu had 3 latitudinal varsha, so does the sky. The key marker of, like, just like the North Pole is the key marker for Shringa latitude on Earth, similarly Druva is the key marker for that latitude in the sky. And just as like New York is maybe a key marker for that mid-hemispheric latitudes, the Saptarishis are doing that, marking that spot of the sky, the Big Dipper. And then the zodiac belt is the tropical area of the latitudes. That's why it's called tropical latitudes. Just as Bu had 3 latitudinal varsha, so does the sky. The highest part of the sky, which is between 60 and 90 degrees, is the abode of the Bhagavata, which means a Bhakta, represented by Druva. The middle part, between 30 and 60 degrees, is the abode of the Mumukshubi, the Gyani, represented by the 7 sages. And the lower part, 0 degrees to 30 degrees, as we will hear in the next text. As we just heard, I copied this. I moved this section. And the lower part, 0 degrees to 30 degrees, is the busy and crowded area of the ecliptic where the controllers of karma, the planets, orbit. This naming of celestial objects conveys the Vedic sense of the sequential relationship between these 3 aspects of yoga: karma, jnana, and bhakti. The sky and the people who are associated with the 3 altitudes of the sky conveys the Vedic sense of yoga and the 3 components of yoga. The most basic yoga is the part of the sky that's closest to the earth, which is where all the planets are, which is where all the karma is being dispensed and regulated. And that's how we do astrology, by reading the zodiac belt. Higher than the zodiac belt, above 30 degrees, is the Saptarishi zone. This is where people who have gone beyond karma, the Gyanis, are signified by that region. And then the upper part is where Druva resides. Druva is the Bhakta, the Bhagavata. So karma, jnana, bhakti. Okay. Take. Any questions? Let me see. There's one thing of here. Comets vaporize when their orbit takes them close to the sun. This is conventional, but this is this is, as I said in the opening text, what Shuka is describing as a once in a... See, you have to really understand this clearly, otherwise you won't understand. Comets which do not impact the Earth vaporize when they're close to the sun. In fact, they don't vaporize, but they lose content and generate a tail. But this comet hit the Earth. So what asteroids and comets do they vaporize in the atmosphere? This comet, he said, became water. Probably it became cloud first, and then fell as water. So that's the vaporization process. Okay, and this comet didn't destroy the Earth. It's not the Theia hypothesis, which may be related to a different story, but this is not the Theia hypothesis of a giant collision with the proto-Earth. This comet didn't have a catastrophic collision with the Earth. This comet broke up into harmless pieces and vaporized in the atmosphere and provided the water. Thank you, Johnny, for your comments. Any other questions? I really enjoyed that. How is this memory accessed? By reading the Bhagavatam? By reading the accounts? Okay, everybody. Here, let me just click a couple of these for everybody can get some hearts and some parties. The nakshatras are in the zodiac belt region. Okay, guys, I'm going to... Oh, wait, it looks like there's another question incoming. All right. Thank you for joining me.